The Pentagon is the headquarters of the United States Department of Defense, located in Washington, D.C. Approximately 26,000 people work in the building, which has 5 sides, 5 concentric rings of 5-story buildings above ground, and 2 basement levels. It is the largest office building in the world in terms of floor area. Each side measures 281 meters. It is so large that General Eisenhower once got lost trying to find his office. Nevertheless, it was built in just 1 year and 4 months, which is remarkably fast considering it would normally take 4 years. The building is extremely significant due to its enormous size and especially its shape, which mirrors the official logo of the Department of Defense. Have you ever wondered why it has 5 sides? The reason behind this is a rather interesting story. It has 284 bathrooms, double the amount you would expect in a building of this size. Is that necessary? There are a lot of theories and mysteries about the shape. Is it some kind of symbolism? Until 2011, there was only one elevator for employees. Was it a safety reason? In the early years, they even had those pneumatic tubes, a very cool way to deliver documents, right? Let's know more about the story of this incredible building. We are in the middle of the year 1941. World War II is happening, and there is a feeling that the United States will soon have to enter the war. The team from the then War Department, which would become the Department of Defense, had been growing exponentially since the First World War. They were spread across 17 temporary buildings in Washington, in addition to hotels and apartments. This made communication and transportation difficult and reduced operational efficiency. General Somervell was tasked with building a new headquarters in preparation for this. He decided that instead of constructing separate headquarters for each major command, the best solution would be a single building to house the entire department. On a Thursday, July 17, 1941, he summoned his designers. The plan was for a building that could accommodate 40,000 people and 10,000 cars. It was supposed to have 3 or 4 floors to save steel, money, and construction time, as well as to preserve the view. The initial draft of the project was expected to be on his desk by Monday morning, no pressure. Since the building couldn't have many floors, it would occupy a large area. Thus, it couldn't be located in Washington. It was then decided that it would be built on the other side of the river, taking up that space. Here, to the east of the Arlington National Cemetery, the land had existing roads and planned ones that surrounded the area on 5 sides. So, the enormous building had to fit there. In that space, they tested various ideas until they decided to make it 5-sided in order to make better use of the area. Once everything was settled, the construction began. But this building is not in the shape we are familiar with anywhere else. The truth is, nobody wanted that giant building in that area, regardless of its shape. Clearly, the president of the Commission of Fine Arts of the United States, the agency that guides the architectural style of Washington, opposed the idea. He said that the Pentagon would obstruct the view from Washington, specifically the view from the Arlington National Cemetery, the most traditional military cemetery in the United States. Additionally, Frederick Olmsted Jr., then president of the agency responsible for planning guidance for federal lands and buildings in that region, and most importantly, President Franklin D. Roosevelt, also opposed the plan, mainly due to concerns about the traffic it would create over the Potomac River. Roosevelt then wrote a letter to the Senate expressing his concerns and requesting that the building be smaller. The letter was simply ignored, and Congress approved the original project. Roosevelt then ordered the building to be constructed slightly further south, and that's where the trickery comes in, according to the bill approved by Congress. Part of the Pentagon's parking lot would occupy a piece of the original project's land, thus avoiding legal issues. The parking lot itself is larger than the new building. The project was expanded to 5 floors above ground, and since there was plenty of space, it wouldn't be limited to having 5 sides. However, the designers decided to keep the shape, saving time since they were about to enter World War II. What they did was adjust it to be more symmetrical, similar to the old forts, which served as inspiration. This shape also had some benefits that had already been considered by the human designers. It is wider than traditional rectangular buildings, resembling more of a circle, and the farthest points are closer together than in a rectangle with the same area. Because of this, it takes a maximum of 7 to 10 minutes for a person to walk across the building. The architects calculated that the distances covered within the building were 30 to 50% shorter compared to a rectangular building. In other words, it had the benefits of a circular building and wasn't difficult to construct because it had straight sides, which was advantageous due to time constraints. Construction began in September 41 and ended in January 43, just 1 year and 4 months later. Normally, It would take 4 years to build a building of this size, but given the urgency, the work was executed without delays. After the attack on Pearl Harbor and the United States' entry into the war, money poured in, and construction accelerated significantly. At times, there were up to 15,000 people working on the project, including 110 architects and 97 engineers. This speed came at a cost. The initial budget was $35 million. The final cost, including roads, reached $85 million, which is almost $1.5 billion today. However, it was still considered a relatively low cost considering the scale of the project and the rents that were no longer being paid for the old buildings. The Pentagon paid for itself within 8 years. Some offices were already occupied during the construction to save money for the war effort, especially for shipbuilding. In addition to reducing costs and speeding up construction, only 13 elevators were built, with 12 for cargo transport and only 1 reserved for employees, specifically for the Secretary of War and his team. Instead, they built many stairs and long ramps. Later, in a renovation that started in '94 and ended in 2011, 70 more elevators were added, and instead of using the huge steel columns and beams with rivets for the main structure, as was typically done at the time, reinforced concrete was used. Around 34,000 tons of steel were saved, enough to build a massive battleship, and 625,000 tons of sand and gravel were used for the reinforced concrete. Everything was saved except for one thing: the bathrooms. They needed 140, but they built 284, twice as many as necessary for a building of this size. This was due to the state of Virginia still having racial segregation laws. The president had passed a law in June '41 prohibiting racial segregation among federal employees. However, the Virginia authorities, who had significant autonomy, insisted on segregated facilities, so the extra bathrooms were constructed. But even before the Pentagon's inauguration, the state of Virginia relented, and the federal law was enforced within the building. For a long time, it stood as a unique place in the state without racial segregation. One needs to know the history to realize how absurd that was. Now, going back to the time of the Cold War, there's a story that the Soviets always had at least 2 nuclear missiles aimed at the Pentagon's hot dog stand located in the center. The story goes that they observed a large movement of people going to the center and thought it could be an underground entrance to a command center. Nobody in Russia confirmed the story. It was certainly an inside joke at the Pentagon. A single Soviet nuclear missile would already destroy the entire city and a large part of the surroundings. So, that's the history. Thank you for watching, and please remember to like and subscribe for more content like that.